Good morning, church. God bless you this morning. We're so grateful to be together. Thank you for coming out for another Living Hope Today devotional. I'm so happy you're here, and thanks again for sharing this with the friends you have and the loved ones in your social media circles. I know the Word of God is going out to many people because of your faithfulness. God bless you and keep you as you continue to participate in this ministry with me. Hey, we've been looking at Matthew's gospel fairly intensely for the last several weeks. We went through the Sermon on the Mount, asking ourselves the question, how does Jesus train his disciples? And as we asked ourselves that question, you remember we went through his teaching in Matthew 5, 6, and 7, the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus taught us about the kingdom. Jesus taught us about the principles of God. His contemporaries, the religious elite of his day, had morphed his teachings and what the Bible intended into something else. They had made religion into a bunch of ritual and rule keeping, but Jesus continues to confront them all the way through the Sermon on the Mount. It's a great series of lessons if you want to go back and look at those. But when we got to Matthew chapter 8, Matthew takes a turn. After all the teaching of 5, 6, and 7, Matthew starts to show us that Jesus can do what only God can do. And if you remember in the miracles, we saw that he healed the leper and the centurion's servant, that he healed Peter's mother-in-law, that he healed all who were sick, as it says in 8:16. And then we saw that Jesus calmed the storm with a word. He controls nature. We saw that he cast the demons out of the two men in chapter 9 or 8. We see that he is able to overwhelm the spiritual world with a command. They have no ability to resist whatever he says because he is God. We saw that he not only heals the paralytic in chapter 9, he forgives his sin. How profound is that? He gets in trouble for that, right? Because they say, you're doing what only God can do. And Jesus says, yeah, well, that's right, because that's who I am. In the end, we saw Jesus call Matthew, the tax collector, to serve him by saying, follow me. And in that exchange, you recall that as Matthew came to Christ and believed and followed him, he left everything behind. He left all his financial security behind to follow Jesus and to be his. And Jesus was criticized for hanging out with somebody that was so unscrupulous as a tax collector. You remember what Jesus said in response to that? He says, look, you guys need to learn this. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. I'm interested in people who understand their depravity, who understand their need for God. If you think you're already good enough for God, I can't really help you. You're basically on your own before God. But if you can understand your desperate need for God and come to me, then I'll deal with you. You see, this has been set up all the way through the gospel, where you have a group of people that are totally desperate to know Jesus, totally desperate to understand who he is and to worship him. And they come to him, and he meets their needs. And then you have another group of guys that they're not desperate at all. They think they already know everything there is to know, and because of their arrogance, they miss out on who Jesus really is. Instead of being willing to receive Jesus and follow him, they want to attack Jesus, and eventually they end up killing him. And that dynamic's been set up. But here we see another instance of somebody who is desperate for God. While he was saying these things to them, in other words, while Jesus was telling these religious elite guys that he came for sinners, not for the righteous, while he's saying this to them, a ruler came in and knelt before him, saying, my daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her and she will live. Now think about this. This is a ruler. This is a synagogue ruler, as we're told in the other Gospels. And in the end, he has been driven to desperation through the death of his 12-year-old daughter. He's been driven to a place where he has no options, and his last resort is to come to God. But he has the faith to come to God. You see at the end of the verse, he says, if you'll just come and lay your hand on her. I know, Jesus, that you have the power to deliver this girl of mine even from death. I know that you're able to do what no one can do. What great faith. But isn't it just like God to drive us to a place of total desperation to get us to understand who he is? The ruler in Matthew 9 has been driven to absolute desperation, and that has pushed him all the way to kneel before Jesus. He's not worried about what his contemporaries are going to think of him because he's knelt before this carpenter from Nazareth who's doing what only God can do. No, he's not worried about any sort of feedback or trouble he might gain from that sort of thing. What he's worried about is the life of his daughter. And through that desperate circumstance, he's come to Jesus. He's knelt before him. And how does Jesus respond? Well, Jesus says, look, I'll come with you. If you're in desperate need, if you come before me and you kneel here in front of me and plead with me, I'm going to be available to you. I'm going to have compassion on you. I'm accessible. Jesus isn't in some ivory tower where he's thinking, well, I'm busy today. Maybe if your people call my people and you can get on my calendar sometime in the next 6 weeks. No, Jesus is right there. You want to come to me and plead? I'll drop everything to help you. What a fantastic illustration of the compassion of God towards all those who will come kneel before him in desperation out of love. Just understand that God is accessible and he is available and he is listening, and it's the same now for you and me as we serve God. But in the passage, we come to an interruption, and the interruption is a woman who is equally desperate as this ruler was. It says in 9:20 that a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. Now just think about this woman's life. She's been bleeding. Maybe it's a fibroid tumor. We don't know. We don't know what kind of abdominal pain she's been in every day chronically for 12 years. What we do understand by reading this is that there has been no medical help for her. Nobody could cure her. There was nothing else available to her. We realize as well that this woman has faith that's beyond measure. She understands, I don't have to go to Jesus and get him to agree to help me. I don't have to even have a conversation with him. I know this man has the power of God in him. If I come to him and just touch his garment, he'll heal me. I know he will. In fact, that's what she says to herself. If I only touch his garment, I will be made well. And what happens? In this crowd pressing all around him as he's going to this ruler's house to deal with the death of this ruler's daughter, this woman sneaks up in the crowd and touches Jesus. If you read the other accounts, Jesus turns around and says, hey, who touched me? And his disciples say, what are you talking about? Who touched you? You're in the middle of a crowd. But Jesus felt the power leave him. He turns and he sees her and he says, take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. And instantly the woman was made well. Again, notice that word instantly. There is no delay. There is no process. There is not even in this instance a command to be made well. Instead, the woman's faith has driven her to the foot of Jesus. She's touched his garment, and that 12 years of bleeding has stopped. The abdominal pain has stopped. What no medical doctor could do for her, Jesus did for her, just by releasing his power. She was desperate, just like the ruler. She was driven to Jesus, just like the ruler. And what happens? Well, she got her need met at the feet of Jesus. Now, I'd like to go forward with what happens to the ruler, but I think we'll take too long if we do that. So instead, let's just look at these miracles in Matthew 8 and 9. We've seen all the ones down to the bottom where now we can add the woman's bleeding has been healed. Why is Matthew showing us all these miracles? What's the point? Well, the point is for sure that Jesus is doing what only God can do. Jesus is proving himself to be the Christ. And this has been a goal of Matthew's all through the gospel, right? Remember in the genealogy in chapter 1, Jesus wants us to make sure we understand that, Matthew wants to make sure that we understand that Jesus has the credentials to be the Messiah. He is the son of Abraham. He is the rightful heir to the Davidic line and the son of David. He is what the Old Testament prophets predicted the Messiah would be. He is born of a virgin, as we found out in the birth narrative Matthew gave us. He is fulfilling the prophecies that that the prophets made about Jesus or the Christ. And now we see that he's healing. He's healing. He's doing what only God can do, and he's doing it with power and authority. He's doing it as only God can do it. So what is Matthew driving us to? Well, today we see that Jesus is totally available. We see that Jesus is compassionate, that he cares. He will drop everything to meet the need in front of him. And we see that Jesus is in charge of disease. He can stop disease with a word. We see that Jesus is in charge of nature. He can stop the wind with the word. We see that Jesus is in charge of the demonic world. Jesus can move a demon with a word. There is no resistance available. We see that Jesus is in charge of forgiving sin. He commands sin to leave and cleanse. He cleanses the paralytic. He receives Matthew, the sinner, through forgiveness. And tomorrow, as we open up the rest of this passage, we're going to see that Jesus even commands death. He has power over death. But before we get to that, I don't want to go into that this morning because I want us to really take a good run at that, and we really don't have time to do it justice this morning. I just want you to understand who it is you've given your life to, who it is you're serving. This is the Christ, the Lord, the one who deserves all the worship we can give him, the one that loves us as no one else loves us, the one that's available to us, who's listening to us, and who has the power to impact any situation. If you're here today and you're desperate because God has allowed circumstances in your life that are well beyond your control, and the only thing you can do is come before him, then do so with faith and understand that there's no situation where Jesus is unable. There is no situation where he can't impact it to receive or to accomplish his purpose. That's really a great way to end this devotional. Let's drive ourselves to the feet of Jesus in whatever desperate circumstance we might be in, knowing that this same Jesus that we've studied in Matthew 8 and 9 is alive right now, listening to your prayer. In fact, after this devotional, maybe it'd be time for you to just turn everything off and get on your knees before him and ask him for the guidance that he can deliver. Ask him for the intervention that only he can give. For the Lord is good, and he cares for you. Let me know what you think about these things. Let me know what your desperate situation might be, and let me know how we can pray for you. We'd love to serve you in that way, knowing that the living Christ is able and willing to serve his own in whatever way will glorify his name the most. God bless you. I pray you serve him well today.
Lord, we give you glory.